And here we are with Tip Wight. Welcome to the show. Glad to have you here.
Thanks. Good to be here.
Tip, tell us about the name Tip, and then tell us a little about you, what you're doing today.
All right. Well, I've done a little bit of just about seems like everything. Had a few careers. Obviously started off in law enforcement as a police officer in Oklahoma, and then joined the Air Force and flew fighters. And of course, when the Air Force takes you in, they tell you as an officer, we're training you to be a leader, and whatever else you do technically is kind of icing on the cake. And that's the case. I ended up commanding a large wing in Germany, and serving in a variety of leadership capacities, and got to fly the F-16, the F-117. Retired in 2013. Went kind of back to my roots with the DC Metropolitan Police Department, ran the Intelligence Fusion Center, the Real-Time Crime Center, and their intelligence division for about 5 years, and then transitioned into the corporate world, providing personnel services for one of the largest, I guess now the one of the top 10 largest defense contractors in the U.S., and did business development and capture, as well as transitioned some programs I won there, and into my present position as director of capture at a graduated small business now as a mid-tier company, again, providing government personnel services and support.
Tip, we're going to back this up a little bit. What made you go from starting out in the police force into the Air Force? What was the inspiration there?
Well, I had always been interested in flying. I suppose it started with my father building, model airplanes and flying radio-controlled airplanes. So I'd always been kind of interested in aviation. I'd done Civil Air Patrol when I was young, and had always wanted to fly and get my private pilot's license, and actually had an Air Force Academy slot coming out of high school, but just figured I wasn't ready for the military, and I wanted to play tennis. And so I went out to the University of Oklahoma, and got into a little of that, but got a degree in political science, law enforcement administration. Never thought I'd use it. But being a police officer in Oklahoma in the mid 80s was pretty challenging, shall we say. You don't get paid much. I was working 3 jobs, 18 hours a day to make ends meet. And interestingly enough, had a discussion in one of my off-duty jobs with a retired Air Force colonel that simply told me, said, well, if you want to go in the military, the Air Force takes the best care of their people. And if you go in the Air Force, you want to fly because that's the mission. And if you want to fly fighters because that's the tip of the spear. And so literally I drove up to one of those strip mall recruiting officers one day and said, hey, I want to fly fighters for the Air Force. So believe it or not, it all worked out. And 30-something years later, there I was.
That is fantastic. So how many years were you on the police force before you realized, hey, this is not working?
Well, I got to tell you, I love law enforcement. That's why I went back to it. It's a real passion. It's a thankless job, as you well know, and a really tough job these days, even tougher than Oklahoma in the mid 80s. But I did that for about 5 years, during and after college. I was going to school nights and working days, or actually swap that around, working nights and going to school days, which is pretty challenging. So while I was in college, finished up and at the University of Oklahoma Police Department, and then transferred up to a larger department after that for about 3 years. So total about 5 before I went in the military.
So F-16s took you where in the Air Force?
Around the world is the simple answer. I got the opportunity to start flying F-16s down in Florida, the MacDill, Tampa, St. Pete area. And then my first operational fighter assignment was at Hill Air Force Base, Utah, and got to go lots of places there on temporary duty status. Did a year in Korea with the F-16s, came back 5 years in Las Vegas at Nellis Air Force Base at Test and Eval Squadron, and then instructor at the then Fighter Weapons School, now the Air Force Weapons School. All flying F-16s, and then a school staff tours that happened. Interestingly, I was an F-117 squadron commander out at Holloman. So after it came out of the black world, and then got back in the F-16 as a group commander at Cannon Air Force Base, New Mexico, and then went overseas as the vice wing commander at Balad Air Force Base or Balad Air Base, Iraq, for a year, and flying F-16s there as well in combat, and then commanded F-16s and A-10s as the 52nd fighter wing commander at Spangdahlem Air Base, Germany.
A little bit of operational time there.
A lot.
Yeah, I'll say. So you came up on time to transition out of active duty. What was in your mind at that time?
That was the hard part. Honestly, I think like many people, when you spend almost 30 years in uniform, and really, if you add my law enforcement time at the time before that, 35 years in public service in uniform, and suddenly it's time to do something different. The question is, what now? And that was really hard for me. I ended up working with a kind of headhunter recruiter at the suggestion of one of my good friends at the time. And she kind of asked me, well, what do you want to do? And it's I'm not really sure. And it's like, well, what do you like doing? And of course, law enforcement was my passion, always kind of had been. Even when I was in the military, I always kind of followed it and thought back to those times. And so one thing led to another, and she suggested I cold call the DC chief of police, which I did, and subsequently ended up going down visiting her. And next thing you know, I was her chief standing up an intelligence fusion center.
You got in on a cold call.
I did. Yeah, it was pretty funny.
That is fantastic. I'm thinking, you said she, was that Kathy Lanier?
It was Chief
Yeah.
Lanier. Yeah, she, the headhunter had asked me, who do you know in the law enforcement world? Of course, 30 years after I'd been, in that world, my answer was pretty much nobody. I said, well, Chief Lanier came and spoke at an anti-terrorism force protection course that I took. Said, so I guess I kind of know her because I asked her a question. And she's like, well, call her up. I was like, yeah, right. Go call the DC chief of police. She's like, no, do it. So I did.
That's a solid takeaway for the audience.
Yeah, I guess you never know till you know. So
yeah. So can you share how that interview went, or that discussion went? I mean, obviously we know you went to work there, but did you treat it as a job interview, or just
oh, absolutely.
Let's see what's happening?
Well, it was a little bit of both. I mean, it was, more exploratory than anything. I call, of course, when you try to cold call the DC chief of police, there's about, several gatekeepers between you and her. And I'm sure they, ran a background check and, who is this guy that wants to talk to Chief Lanier? But, my simple answer was, hey, I had spoken with her at a conference and wanted to follow on and continue the discussion and see what opportunities might be available with DC police. And so I did get through to her, and it was really funny. The intro, because I said, hey, Chief, you probably don't remember me. You spoke at this conference. And she goes, oh, no. And she has she's just an amazing leader, frankly. And in fact, one of the best I've ever worked for. And I've got to work for a lot in both law enforcement and the military, and she is right there at the top. And but she said, "No, I remember. I came off the stage to the left, and you asked, and she told me the question I asked her." I was like, "Wow,
that's amazing! That's amazing."
So she said, "Yeah, why don't you come down and see me, and we'll talk." And so then I followed that up with a in person. Went to see her, and she had one of her aides take me down to the Intel Center and show me around and said, is this something you think you could do? And I was like, sure. So next thing you know, I'm working for her. So that was I really enjoyed it.
What do you think resonated with her in that conversation about your background and your ability to do the job? You just said, does this sound like something you could do? And you said, yeah, sure. I think many military people would think, yeah, I could figure this out, or I could. Were you, did you believe that in yourself, or help us with the connection there?
Well, that's the great thing about the Air Force and the military in general. You do get a broad range of experiences and skills. When I was an operations group commander, I had an intelligence flight that I commanded, and then certainly in Iraq, I worked oversaw with our intelligence fusion center there as we were dealing with real-time threats. And then as a wing commander, I certainly had intelligence under as one of the functions of the wing. So it wasn't something I was unfamiliar with. And then, of course, with my previous background in law enforcement, I certainly understood law enforcement intelligence. So on the scale of DC, obviously, that's a whole separate ball of wax. When you talk about there's 32 overlapping federal and civilian jurisdictions, depending on there's a corner you stand on, there's 4 different jurisdictions, depending on which way you step off the corner. So that is an incredibly complex challenge, which I obviously didn't know. But then again, as you go through the military, you're often put in incredibly complex situations that you learn and adapt. So I think it was just I did have a background in all the areas she was talking about. And then the military experience that you're given, being thrust into the vice wing commander position in Iraq in a combat zone with 20,000 soldiers at the base plus 24,000 rotational airmen flying combat missions, being shot at daily, with rockets and mortars on the base and all the functions that the base does. Was that something I had ever done? No, but I certainly was prepared for it. So those kind of challenges, I think the military prepares you very well for them.
How was that integration coming from the military into that police force? Were there those who came up through the police force who said, "Who is this guy?" Or how did that go?
Yeah, that's certainly, I would say, transitioning, into the civilian workforce from the military can be a shock, certainly a culture shock. But less so in the law enforcement world because it's very hierarchical and very similar to the military in many respects. The law enforcement professionals and officers all respect the military very well. So somebody with the background and coming in, plus I had the prior police background. So there was that. That being said, in any organization, people who've been there 20 plus years and you've got an outsider coming in a leadership position, there can be some challenges. And then certainly, there's a difference. I was a police executive there, so I was not sworn. There's a big, it's just the standard groups, culture, any type of different, you've got the sworn and then you've got the, non-sworn civilian employees. And so there was some, when I had to supervise and command sworn officers as a civilian, even though I'd been sworn previously, and there's obviously some challenges there. And the other, I would say, was an interesting challenge for me was that working with very young millennium or Gen Y, Z personnel.
Careful, we're showing our age here.
Yeah, absolutely. But that's a different challenge in the military. You give a direction and it's going to be carried out. The generational challenges aren't as noticeable there. But in the civilian world, where I was hiring civilian analysts, and a lot of them were just very recent college graduates, there's some interesting challenges there. I never thought twice about security clearances and working in a vault. That's what intelligence professionals do. And yet when we would ask our young analysts, okay, get your security clearance, we need to get you in the vault. And they didn't want to go because they couldn't use their chat functions on their smartphones, So just little things that you never see coming that it's like, okay, so we'll have to figure that out. So there were lots of interesting challenges, but very rewarding and just tremendous, great, much like in the military. My experience with, was don't worry, the younger generation is perfectly great. We saw some great young Americans over there supporting combat, and the same thing. We had great young professionals supporting the law enforcement community.
So you found your way back into defense. Tell us how this transition occurred. This
Well,
would be the third career.
Yeah, well, ish, yeah. It depends. Probably fourth. But I was commuting the whole time. My significant other lives down in the Hampton Roads area, and I was in DC, and 200,000 miles on I-95 and I-64 on Mondays and Fridays. I think I've got PTSD from I-95. So after about 8 years of doing that, 3 years at the Pentagon and 5 years at DC Police, that just kind of got to be silly. And said, this commute thing is really, when you think how much it's basically a day of your week you're spending on the road sitting in traffic, and
Yeah.
you just kind of go, That's not worth it." And so, and Chief Lanier had left. She got actually is, I presume she still is head of NFL security. So
I was going to bring that up. I thought she had gone to the NFL, which
she
is
did,
an
yeah.
interesting transition. of
It
its own.
was, and
Yeah.
they couldn't have picked a better person. But so the dynamic obviously changed with the police department a little bit, and the years on the road got to be a drag. So I just kind of started talking with some of the folks that I knew down here about some opportunities, and one of them happened to work for a large defense contractor, and I sent him my resume, and next thing you know, somebody snapped me up and said, "Wow, we'd like to have you join our team." And there you go. So launched into another brave new world, if you will, because that was a big culture change. Like I said, the military to law enforcement, there's some, but it wasn't huge. But going from military/law enforcement into the contracting world, that's a big change. Whole new foreign language to learn, all new processes, and roles.
So Tip, I'm looking at the public record of, we know where you worked, Huntington Ingalls, a very large shipbuilder. Having had some exposure to the defense community here myself, tell me, how did you position yourself to demonstrate appeal to that company that you could come in and do what they needed done, having been Air Force, potentially 1 strike, and police after that, potentially 2 strikes. How did you flip those to advantages such that HII would say, "We need Tip"?
Well, HII, while they build ships, they do a lot of other things as well. There's a division that provides government personnel services. And fortunately, there was a retired Air Force colonel working in that division that saw my resume and saw what I had done and my
He needed a friend.
He apparently did. We joked that we were going to try to turn HII into a Air Force company that also builds ships. We did a great job of it, to tell you the truth. Won some big contracts in the Air Force world, but that was an area of the Air Force, or that HII was looking to expand. And so it was just a combination of timing, and then somebody recognizing what was on my resume. And like, I think he saw a bit of himself in me, knew that I have the capability to transition into doing that.
How did you learn how to do business development and capture?
Well, I had a good mentor. That individual that hired me, I ended up working for him initially. And so he coached me. They also sent me to business development boot camp. And so I learned the language, the codes, the skill, got my program management professional certification. So it really helped to understand the language and the processes that were being used, and have some credibility when I was doing those roles.
How long did it take you to get comfortable in that new position?
Oh, probably, comfort is a a big term, but I'd say about a year till you kind of, you've gotten the schooling, and then you've had some practical experience. And of course, you're learning all the time. I still, every day there's something new I'll learn. We're in my current role, we're standing up a new company. So I've never stood up a company before. So I'm learning lots about that. But it's just the ongoing process. But just like the military, when you get put into a new assignment, 6 to 9 months later, you're the old hand and running the show.
So your present role, Tip, you're in the process of standing up this company, Yorktown Systems Group, or
no, York, we've stood up the capture function, which didn't exist
okay,
before I arrived, but we're standing up a new company. It's a joint venture between YSG and another large company to go after an opportunity that we're pursuing. So we're actually that joint venture is a separate entity, and it's a new company that combines the capabilities of the two existing companies. So that's a whole new world too.
So share some perspectives, Tip, of what do you see as you're working in defense? What works? What clearly doesn't work? Are there things that you would suggest people embrace or discard?
Yeah, I think number one thing, and it was interesting, I was talking to a potential candidate for a position today, and he commented on this same thing that I'm about to tell you, is that certifications are a big deal. In the military, you don't really think about it. It's not really needed. If you need it, the government will probably send you there, send you to that school. But in the civilian world coming out, the PMP certification is a big deal. Any of the, functional certifications, whether that's, human resources, proposal management, any of those things, especially in the cybersecurity world, all of those certificates are of critical importance, and more so when an employer is looking at you. Do you have a college degree? Have you done XYZ? That's interesting, but hey, do you have the cert? Because that's what's required on many of these contracts for the positions, is the certification. So that's a big one. Get all the certs you can. If you're looking to go into management, get that program management certification. If you're going to do anything in cyber, get every cyber cert you can possibly obtain. The second thing is just that realization that it's going to be different, in the military, especially as a former military leader. When you say the carpet looks dirty, the next day you come in and there's probably new carpet laid down. That's not going to happen in the civilian world. And it's more of a, collaborative approach. There's a lot of team building that's got to occur, a lot of, getting to know people. You can't just come in and start giving direction, even if you're in a leadership position, because you have to realize, in the civilian world, every person is an individual, independent contractor. And, every day they show up at work, that's a validation of their continuing contribution, but they can choose not to do that the next day, and it's no big deal. And people will rotate so much more frequently than in the military. And if you can get a good year or two out of somebody in a position, that's fairly standard in the civilian sector. Whereas in the military, other than change of stations or government directed rotations, you're going to see the same folks around. So it's a much more fluid workforce. There's a different dynamic in leadership, and you just have to understand that. And you're going to be dealing with a very multi-generational workforce. And so all the different ways that people communicate and interact, you just have to understand that and appreciate that. So if you haven't spent some time learning about the kind of multi-generational workplace and communication methods, that would definitely behoove someone who's on the cusp of making that transition.
Okay, Tip, you gave me a big opening here. Off camera, we were talking a little about social media, and here you just said that you need to be able to communicate on all the channels. And I know that there are many corporate channels, Slack, CRM tools, just a couple of examples. But in the social media world, you have some concerns. Maybe you could share what some of those are.
Yeah, well, I think fundamentally, the first thing is there's a difference between what you do professionally and what you do personally. Obviously, such tools as LinkedIn professionally are important to network and find opportunities, or for recruiting and human resources purposes. So we use that tool a lot in the corporate world. But in terms of sharing your personal details, what you eat, who you hang out with, what you like to do in your spare time, I personally don't think that needs to be out on social media. We've certainly in the law enforcement and intelligence community, what's out there is unbelievable. And if you want to invite someone into your home and target your self and your family and or your identity by putting all that information on social media in an open sense, and even if you think you've locked it down, the companies change all their policy so often that even when you think it's locked down, it's not really. And then there's a lot of stuff that obviously goes on at the back end that where your information gets aggregated and shared, whether you want it to be or not. And all that can be tapped into. So I say there's things you have to do for professional, for marketing. As a corporation, you certainly want to use all the tools of social media, so you need to understand it. But what you do personally, I choose not to have anything more out there than has to be. And there's probably even too much out there on LinkedIn right now, frankly. And once I'm done with the business world, that profile's going away. So I think it's a time and a place, and knowing what the vulnerabilities are. That's what's important too.
Tip, recognizing that there may be some classification issues here, and I don't mean to broach into any of those, but with respect to things like personal data and data rights that seem to be a challenge for the social media companies. Do you think there's room for some form of regulation? I've heard some suggest that some of these social media channels should be treated as the way we treat telephone communications, or, be a more regulated industry. Do you think there's an appropriate space for that, or what is the fix? How do you make it more safe?
Well, I'm not sure that there is a fix, to be honest. I think you have to, I think General Hayden famously made the comment that you just have to understand that if it's digital, it will be exploited. The problem, you can regulate anything you want to in the United States, but given that the internet is a global, unless you pull the plug, and then there's entities that will create their own. The fact is that it's out there, it's exploitable, and you can't control all the other countries and the companies that are registered in other companies and how that's used. And, with the various means that people can access the, internet, there's really no way to control it. So you just have to understand that it's a vulnerability. And that's why I say be judicious in what you put out there. And as you know, once it's out there forever. So
Tip, I'd like to ask, if we were to come back 5 years from now, what do you think we'd be talking about?
How my transition into retirement's going. But never say never, as they say. I thought I was pretty much done with the corporate world before I took this recent position, but somebody at workforce said, "Hey, I've got this opportunity and I need your skills," and convinced me to come along for the ride. So who knows what's next? But at some point we're all getting there's only so many days to do what you want to do. So we'll see how that goes.
It would appear that you have failed at retirement a couple of times here.
I have,
so maybe could you just, as we close here, paint a picture of what do you think retirement really looks like?
Well, it's obviously personalized for each individual, right? Some people are motivated by work. They want to work until the day they, depart. And they find that, some people have to financially, depending on your financial situation. I will tell you that retiring from the military and having that, backbone of the pension is one of the best things I ever did. I've certainly recommended that. My son's following in my footsteps, at least initially, in the military. And that is just having that security blanket is tremendous. And it gives you a lot of options to do other things. But some people, would rather travel and see the world. Fortunately, the military allowed me to travel and see the world. So I've done most of that, although it's nice to go in capacities where people aren't shooting at you, at least not very often. I think it's just different, but most of all, it's having the freedom and the flexibility to do what you want when you want. That's certainly for me what it is, and being able to not have the impacts on you where you just got to go do these things, or the next 6 to 9 months of your life is tied up on a project or whatever, that if something pops up where you want to go do something fun, that you really can't. But again, some people find that part to be the fun and the challenge. So it's different for everybody.
Tip Wight, thanks so much for being with us on Make Your Move.
You bet. Glad.